Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, Mastering Web Page Test. My name is Andrea, and of course with me is Matthew. We are partners and founders at Elementive. At Elementive, we work with businesses and teams of all shapes and sizes to help them fix the technical issues holding back their website's performance. To learn more about who we are and what we do, we invite you to check out our website at elementive.com. Before Matthew jumps into the presentation, I want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded. We'll be sharing a link to the recording and the presentation later this week. Also, we reserved time at the end of the webinar to answer any of your questions, so please feel free to post those in chat as we go along. Thank you again for joining us, and Matthew, I'll go ahead and let you get started.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited to get in and talk to you about WebPageTest and how you can use it to evaluate your website speed and really test everything out. So first things first, why are we talking about WebPageTest on here? So when we start thinking about website speed, we want to make sure that everybody is able to really measure website speed, because website speed affects everything on a website, right? Everything kind of ties back to speed in some ways. Certainly SEO ties back to website speed. We know that Google is using it in various ways to determine how to evaluate websites, but also website speed affects conversion optimization. It affects brand reputation. It affects how landing pages are going to work from paid ads and so much more, right? So everybody needs to know something about website speed. Everybody needs to be able to look at website speed and evaluate website speed and understand how it's influencing their particular part of the website. So WebPageTest is a really cool tool because it's one that everybody can use. It offers some pretty basic reports that are really fundamental, that let everybody get in there and see some of the very fundamental aspects of website speed without getting too many details. And then there's plenty of very detailed reports that you can use to dive in. So it works really well for all levels. That way, developers who are deep in the code and want to really diagnose something can get in and use it. But if you're a marketer, you're an SEO, and you're not maybe as technical, you're not as deep in the code, then WebPageTest still has plenty to help you get a high level sense of what's going on with your website speed. The other thing that WebPageTest offers is both paid and free accounts, and their free accounts actually really good. A lot of the tools out there, they offer a pretty limited free account that doesn't give you too much, but WebPageTest's free account is still pretty robust. And gives you lots of different options, gives you lots of different things. So the things I'll talk about here today are all available in the free account, but I'll make a couple notes where maybe you can get some other things in the paid account. And the paid account isn't that expensive either. So if you want to sign up for a month or something to really dive into website speed, maybe during a redesign or redevelopment, there's some really good options in there. All right, so with that said, let's hop over to WebPageTest and start looking at it and how we can go through the reports and what we need to do. So first things first, one of the things that makes WebPageTest really one of the best tools out there, and the tool that I've kind of defined, just keep coming back to because there's so much about it, is that it lets you configure different aspects of how the website is loaded. And I think this is one of the most important things to keep in mind and remember when you're thinking about measuring website speed is there's no one speed that your website loads. There's no one experience people have loading your website. Instead, what you have is a whole bunch of different experiences. So if you have 1,000 people who visit your website, you're going to have 1,000 different experiences for how people loaded your website and the kinds of ways that the website speed is going to work for those individuals. So that doesn't mean we need to test our website speed in 1,000 different ways for each of those visitors, but it does mean that we want to test our website speed in a bunch of different ways to try and get a representative sample of what most of our visitors are probably experiencing. Google's Core Vitals tries to get at this by taking an average of what everybody is experiencing over the last 28 days, right? That's what the Chrome User Experience Report is. that then Google uses to come up with the core vitals numbers, right? And determine what largest contentful paint is or interaction to next paint when the other core vitals metrics are. They're looking at those real user metrics. But instead of waiting for a 28-day average from Google, we can simulate those different environments that we have and the different environments that our visitors are using to load our website. And we can do that through different configurations in WebPageTest. So there's a lot that you configure in here, but there's really only 4 that you need to pay the most attention to. And the first is the most fundamental. You want to make sure that you're testing different pages on your website. Really often when I talk to developers and business owners and people who are measuring their website speed, I find that they're only testing their website's homepage, and they're putting in their website's homepage URL into a testing tool, and that's it. And they're not testing all the other pages on their website. And you need to test so many more pages on your website, because some of your pages on your website are going to load really fast, and some of your pages on your website are going to load really slow. And that's because each page is a little bit different. Maybe some pages have a lot of features and have a lot of text and have a lot of videos or a lot of images or a lot of third-party embeds, where other pages are a little bit simpler and don't have as much going on. So you want to test a variety of pages on your website. What I tend to find makes the most sense is test your top traffic pages, maybe your top 10, top 15 pages, and then test a few different pages of each template type on your website. So if you have a blog, you have product pages, you have a discussion forum, you have a directory, and so on, you have different templates on your website, test some of those different templates and a few pages of each, so that way you can get an idea of what speed looks like across your entire website. And honestly, if all you do in WebPageTest is not mess with any of these other configuration settings, but instead just change which pages you're testing, you're going to be so much further ahead than a lot of other websites. But then there's other things that you can configure in here as well. So under simple configuration, WebPageTest gives you a few different things that you can configure. Starting off with, you can configure which device you're testing on. So you can configure a test to look at speed on mobile devices, or you can test on desktop devices. And mobile devices are going to have different ways of loading a website than desktop devices. And that's going to change how people are able to load your website and the kind of experience they have when they're loading your website. So you can pick some of these to pick different mobile or desktop configurations and see. I'll show you in a minute here how you can get even more granular than that and pick specific kinds of mobile devices under the advanced configuration settings. The other area that we can configure in WebPageTest is the connection speed. So lots of different people have lots of different ways that they're connecting to the internet, right? We have people that are still on very slow connection speeds. We have other people, probably most of us on this webinar here this morning, are on very fast connection speeds, right? We have higher connection speeds than maybe the average person does, certainly more than maybe most of our visitors to our website do. So we want to test different connection speeds. And by default, under the simple configuration, we have a 4G connection speed, we have cable connection speeds, 3G connection speeds on here as well. So you can test a variety of those. And here again, there's more options that WebPageTest gives you for testing more connection speeds and getting more granular with that. The other thing that we can configure is the test location. And the test location has a lot to do with something called latency. So what latency is getting to is the physical distance that the signal has to transfer between where the website server is hosted and where the visitor is located. So if the server is located in Virginia and the visitor to the website is located in Virginia, there's not a lot of distance that things have to travel. And so the website's probably going to load a little bit faster than if the website was hosted in California and the visitor's located in Virginia. And where this plays out more is on international websites. So on international websites that get a lot of traffic from lots of different countries, you can really run into big problems with this if things are not hosted correctly and you don't have hosting distributed in lots of different locations. Because if you do have visitors coming from India, but your server's in the United States, they're going to have a really tough time loading the website, and they're going to experience really slow speeds accessing the site. So you want to make sure that you're configuring these to match what your visitors are actually doing, where your visitors are located, what connections they're using, and what devices they're using on here. So we have more granular options that we can get into here with the advanced configuration settings. So the advanced configuration settings is where you start seeing some differences between the paid web page test account and the free web page test account. You still have lots of options on the free account. You just have more options on the paid account. So I'm logged into a paid account right now. So I'll see more options than you would if you're opening up and looking at a free account. So under here, we have lots of different locations that we can pick from, including lots of options outside the US. So if you do have a website with a lot of traffic outside the United States, you have lots of options that you can pick from to be able to really test where your visitors are physically located. Under browser, this is where we can get more granular. So instead of just saying we have desktop devices or mobile devices, we can pick a Chrome experience versus a Firefox experience. And those might be different. Those are different browsers, and they might have different ways of loading your website. And we want to test those out and look at those. Equally, under devices for mobile, we have Android devices, we have iOS devices down here. And WebPageTest is really great in that it gives you a whole variety of devices, including some older ones. So older models of iPhone that some people are still probably using. And so we want to be able to test our website on those older devices if we find our visitors are using those devices. Then under here, we can also select a connection speed. So they give you a bunch of default options for connection speeds beyond the ones we are seeing under simple configuration. So we've got cable or DSL, which can be really good to test desktop connections on. And then we've got a few different options for mobile, everything from a slow 3G connection, which most people don't have at this point, up to 3G fast, which a lot of people still have, connection speeds at that level, and then all the way up to 4G fast, or things like LTE, which is super fast mobile devices. So you can really pick a range of what's representing what kind of experience, what kind of connection speeds your visitors have. So what this all gets to is we need to know, well, what are our visitors actually doing? Where are they physically located? What devices are they actually using to come to our website? So we can get some of that information in GA4. So I'll show you this real quick so that way you know where to go and get this out of GA4. So under reports, we want to go down to the user section. And then under user, we want to go to tech and then click on overview. And then on the overview area, we can find what browsers people are using, what devices people are using. In the case of this example, this is Google's demo account. Almost everybody is on a mobile device. So if this is what you were to see on your particular website, probably not much point in testing speed on a desktop connection. Maybe you want to look at it a little bit, but most of your focus is going to be on testing different mobile experiences. But in other cases, you might look at this and see that, oh, it's actually about 50-50 between desktop and mobile, or 60-40. And in that case, you're going to want to make sure that your tests that you're running in WebPageTest are more evenly split between mobile and desktop devices. Up here, we can also see what type of device they're using. So we can see that they're on Android. For the most part, in this case, not very much on iOS, but a little bit there. So maybe we'd want to test some iOS connections as well on there. So this gives us an idea of how we need to configure some of those parts of WebPageTest. The other thing we can find in here under user attributes is demographic details. So under demographic details, you can see where people are located. So you can see what country they're in, or you can toggle this to region or city, and then you can go back to WebPageTest and try to find somewhere that's close. You may not find an exact location match between the two lists, but you can at least get somewhere close to where they're located. So that way you are able to experience the website's load like your visitors are experiencing it. So once you have everything configured on here, you're ready to go ahead and start running the tests. So I already have some tests run, so I'll hop over to those so we can take a look at what these reports look like. So the first report that you're going to see on here is the performance summary report. The performance summary report is really great if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to go super deep into the details. You don't want to know a lot of the information about your website speed. You just want to get a high level look of what's going on. Then the performance summary tab is really going to be the right report to look at and pay attention to. And if all you look at is the performance summary report, you're going to get a lot of really great information and have a lot of really good ideas about how to improve your website speed. So under performance summary, the first thing they show you are these 3 core questions the web page tests ask. These are different ways that they bucket website speed. Is it quick? Is it usable? Is it resilient? Most of these are self-explanatory, right? Quick just means, does it load fast to the page? And you can get a sense of, well, where is this at? Is this, loading quick enough for visitors or not? Or is there quite a bit of delay? In this case, this is kind of saying it's not bad, but maybe there's some requests that are slowing things down on here. Is it usable? This has more to do with layout stability or layout shift. It has stuff to do with accessibility and also how quickly the website becomes interactive. How fast can people actually be able to interact with this particular page? And then the last category that they bucket things in is something called resiliency. And so the question of, is it resilient, gets to how dependent the site is on third-party scripts. The more dependent it is on third-party scripts, the more brittle the website's going to be, right? The more the website is probably going to be delayed. If something happens to those third-party scripts, the more the website may struggle to load correctly with those. So you can get a sense of where you might have some problems on here, just at a high level glance. And it gives you some ideas of what you might want to start digging into or what you might want to start looking at on here. The other thing that they give you within each of these is opportunities and tips to improve these. So just to open this up real quick for the opportunities, they'll go through and give you an idea of what kinds of things you want to pay attention to and give you some ideas of how you maybe want to improve your website speed. So here's the files that are blocking page rendering on this particular website. So these are files maybe you want to pay attention to and see if you can change something about how these load or not. So if you go through and look at these different ideas, particularly the ones that are maybe a little bit bigger, affect more files, that's going to give you some interesting ideas to explore and look at to improve the speed of your website. Not all of these are going to be ones you need to do. Not all of these are going to be ones that you need to really pay attention to. And some of these aren't going to be ones you can do at all. But you're going to probably find a few in here, or at least give you a jumping off point of ways you can improve your website speed. So the other thing that we have on the performance summary report is an overview of page performance metrics. So this goes through the different key metrics that you want to pay attention to and use to understand how fast your website is loading. But even more so than the metrics themselves, I think what's really helpful on here is the visual loading process. So you can see how this website is actually loading and what somebody on this case on a Moto G Power Chrome 4G Fast in Salt Lake City, Utah, how they would have loaded this particular website and what kind of experience they would have had. In this case, it's not that great of an experience. They would have started loading the website over here and they would have waited and waited and waited and waited and been staring at a blank screen for about 2.5 seconds before something showed up. And you can see in this thumbnail that there's some blank images in here. So it's not even that the website was complete at 2.4 seconds. It just started starting to load at that point. So this is a pretty slow experience. And there's maybe some opportunities that this website has to improve how quickly the website is able to show up and how quickly things are painted. And if you scroll over, you can start to see when other elements come in and when things start to show up. You can see that the actual content, the stuff that's filling in those white boxes, starts to show up here, around the 6-7 second mark, and it isn't until 7.9 seconds that we really have what most of us would consider to be sort of the complete and final version of the website on here. So it gives you an interesting way to understand the experience, even if you don't know what any of these metrics exactly mean, even if you aren't sure what all these metrics are specifically referring to. If you have a lot of traffic that comes back to your website, so they don't just visit once and leave, but they visit and then they continue visiting, maybe they look at more pages, or maybe as they visit, they're refreshing pages often. WebPageTest also will run a repeat view. So with a repeat view, they're storing things in cache. So then they're starting with something cached in the browser, which would mimic what visitors are doing when they come back to your website. They've already visited, so they have font files and images and CSS files and all that stuff already loaded in the browser's cache. And so now that things are in the cache is in a warm state. And as a result, the website should load a bit faster. And in this case, we can see that it does load a little bit faster, but maybe if this website has a lot of repeat traffic, there's an opportunity to get it loading even faster still for repeat traffic, if that's something that matters for you and for your audience. The other thing you get on the performance summary report is a recap of real world usage metrics. So these are the same things you'll see in a tool like PageSpeed Insights. So with this, you'll get Google's Core Vitals metrics that they're collecting out of the Chrome browser. So visitors who come to your website in Chrome over the last 28 days are represented here, and you can see how these compare. So in this case, largest contentful paint, which is one of Google's Core Vitals metrics, is a little over 3 seconds. Up here, we saw it a little under 3 seconds. Both of those indicate there's probably some opportunities to improve largest contentful paint on this website. So you can give a comparison between those two to see what things look like. So that's the performance summary report. And like I said, if all you do is focus on performance summary, it gives you a lot of good ways to just get an understanding of how somebody's loading your website on that particular connection speed. But if you want to dig into more details, we can go to the waterfall view. So the waterfall view, if you click into this, gives you a detailed breakdown of how the website loads. And so the waterfall report initially looks pretty complex, pretty involved, and there's a lot going on in here, but it's really useful to be able to step through and use it and understand all the things that are making up your website. So let's talk through what's going on in here. Starting off with, you can get a list of all the files that are needed to load this particular website. So to load this website's homepage, we have 328 files that have to be requested. So that means that the browser is having to request 328 different things from the server. And so there's 328 different conversations basically happening between the browser and the server, with the browser making requests for files for this website to load. And that's not unusual, right? 328 sounds like a lot maybe, but we see plenty of websites that have several hundreds of files that have to load. Obviously, if you can get fewer files to load, your website's probably going to load quite a bit faster. So that's one of the first things you can get on here. But for each of these files, you'll notice there's these horizontal bars over here. And these horizontal bars tell us how long it takes to load that particular file. So picking on this particular JavaScript file, let me zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little more easily. So picking on this particular JavaScript file, we can see that this takes 831 milliseconds to load. And what this horizontal bar is telling us is when this file started loading and when this file stopped loading. That way we get a sense of when this file is actually triggered on our website, when the browser is actually making the request for that file from the server. So that's pretty important information. So we know the order of operations for when these files come in. We know that some files need to load really early on in the website loading process in order for the website to have the stuff it needs to build the page. It needs certain images, it needs certain files to actually display the main parts of the page. We want to make sure those are a little bit higher up and make sure those are starting a little bit sooner in the website loading process. So if you go through this and you find, wait a minute, this JavaScript file down here, it doesn't start until this point here, well, then that's a bit of a problem. It means that you need that JavaScript file to actually maybe move up where it starts a little bit sooner. So it starts presenting some opportunities for that. The other thing you can look at on here is more details about how each of these files load. So I'll take the core homepage file. If you click on this, you'll get details about the timing on here for how that request is made. So it starts off by saying when this file was discovered. In this case, this is the homepage. So it was discovered on the initial request. But then you can start to see, well, when was the request actually started? So when was the browser actually able to make the request to the server for the code associated with this file? And you can see that it took a little bit of time between when the connection started and when the request actually started, right? It took about 0.6 seconds here, almost 0.7 seconds for that request to be made. And we can kind of see that in the horizontal bar here with all this extra stuff that has to happen before the file is loaded. So this starts to give us an idea of, well, where do we need to focus? If we want this to load a little bit faster than 847 milliseconds, what do we need to do? Well, in this case, the DNS lookup time, it took 385 milliseconds. So maybe we could change something about our DNS configuration to see if we can get that to load a little bit faster. Some DNS providers make faster connections than others. We can also look at our SSL negotiation. That's 187 milliseconds. Maybe not a lot to do on this website, but maybe for your website, there's going to be some sluggishness there that maybe can be improved. This website isn't too bad for time to first byte. It's got a time to first byte of 95 milliseconds. This time to first byte line here is actually a different time to first byte than you'll see elsewhere in WebPageTest report. This time to first byte should really be relabeled as server processing time. In this case, the server processing time was only 95 milliseconds. But in other cases, you might find that that's 500, 600 milliseconds, indicating there's stuff you can do on your server to improve how quickly this particular file loads. So by clicking into these details, you can really start getting deep into understanding, okay, why is this file not loading faster than I wanted to? And what can I do to maybe focus on improving that particular file's load time? Now, the other thing that's really helpful in the waterfall view is these vertical lines. So these vertical lines indicate some of the key metrics. So these are the key metrics we were looking at on the performance summary side. So if we know from looking at the performance summary that we have some problems that we need to address with some of those metrics, then we can see, well, what files are loading that are associated with that particular metric. So we know in looking at the performance summary for this one that it took a long time for the website to appear, right? Person was staring at a blank screen for quite a while before anything showed up. Well, that's first contentful paint or start render. And those are these green bars here. So if we look down the loading process here on the waterfall chart, we'll see where the green bar, falls. We can see that, what files are loading before things can actually start to appear. And we come down to basically line 47. So that means there's about 47 files that had to load before we were able to actually start presenting any information to the visitor, before we were able to display anything on this particular web page. And all of a sudden, you can look at that and go, well, okay, what can I do with some of these 47 files to improve my website's first content full paint to make that load faster? I have a lot of JavaScript files in here. I have some JPEG files, more JavaScript files, some Ping files, some font files, CSS files. What can I do with these files to maybe get those to load a little bit faster? So that way I can get my first content full paint and my start render and move this vertical bar more this direction. What I see a lot of websites do is that they'll take something like first content full paint and they'll say, oh, well, I have to optimize all my images or I have to optimize all my JavaScript files. And what you see them doing is they'll start optimizing stuff down here, stuff that's to the right of this line. Well, stuff to the right of this line isn't really going to affect the first content full paint, right? All of this stuff to the right happens after the first content full paint has already fired. So you know that if you want to improve something like first contentful paint or any of these other metrics represented by the vertical bar, you need to focus on the stuff to the left of the line. You need to focus on these files to actually improve things. So by using the waterfall report, you can get a pretty clear sense of what files you need to focus on. And then you can go through here and you can look at, well, what files have the biggest hit, what files have the biggest impact on this. And undoubtedly, it looks like it's these JavaScript files, all of which are somewhere between 800 to 1,000 milliseconds. So if you were trying to improve first contentful paint on this website, that might be a pretty good place to start because those files are pushing out this green bar, are pushing out first contentful paint. So the waterfall view is a really useful way to be able to dig in and start to understand what's happening with each of these individual metrics, what files are involved. And you can spend a lot of time going through each of these files and the details for each of these individual elements and how they're loading to the page and what's going on with each of those and what that tells you about how you can optimize each of those. So that one's one of the more helpful reports I find, and one of the things that really makes sense to spend a fair amount of time digging into if you want to go really deep into understanding how your website loads. The last report I want to talk about here today is the Web Vitals report, and I forget which tab it is, so let me go over here, click on Web Vitals. In the dropdown, you can get to that with the Web Vitals. So under here, you can see all of Google's Core Web Vitals metrics on here. You've got largest contentful paint, you've got cumulative layout shift, and then instead of interaction to next page, they've got total blocking time. And the reason for that is that WebPageTest is running what's called a synthetic test or a simulated test, right? This isn't a real person visiting the page. This is one that is using a default demo testing device that WebPageTest has. So they can't get interaction next paint. Interaction next paint only works for actual people visiting the page who are able to click, who are able to engage with the page. So instead, they're using a proxy metric of total blocking time. And what total blocking time is going to tell you is about how long the browser is too busy to respond to a visitor's interaction. So if your total blocking time is really high, your interaction to next paint is also probably going to be very high because the browser is unable to respond to the visitor's interaction because there's too much code running. So when you look at this report, you can get details about what's happening with each of these metrics and what is actually causing largest contentful paint or cumulative layout shift or total blocking time to be really high. So starting off with largest contentful paint, we can see a visual here of what our largest contentful paint element is on here. And in this case, it's their logo. And the logo shows up at the 3.4 second mark, right? 3,400 milliseconds. So largest contentful paint, in order to be considered good by Google, in order to create a good user experience, should load at the 2.5 second mark. So we're about a second over where this should be. So right away, we know that there's a problem. And now, because of this report, we know which specific element to focus on. But there's a question here about largest contentful paint of, well, what do you do to improve it? And really, there's two ways you can improve LCP, largest contentful paint. You can either optimize this element, in this case, this image, to get that to load faster, right? So you're optimizing that image, you're making that image smaller, maybe using a different format for the image, something like that, to try and get that image to just be better optimized. The other thing you can do is you can just get that element to load sooner in the website loading process. And this report helps us understand which of those two options we need to consider. So we have a different version of the waterfall view here that we can look at. And this highlights what our LCP element is. In this case, it's this SVG. And we can see that this is the 46th item that's loaded to the page. The element itself only takes 503 milliseconds to load, right? It's a pretty quick loading process, but we can see under timing that this element isn't even discovered by the browser until the 2.5 second mark, almost 2.6 second mark. And the request doesn't even start until a little bit later than that, meaning that the browser isn't even beginning to load the LCP element until long after the 2.5 second mark that it should be trying to hit for the LCP element. So in this case, the question is, well, what would you do to improve LCP on this website? You don't really need to improve this SVG anymore, right? The SVG is already loading in 503 milliseconds. That's really fast. Maybe you could tweak it just a little bit more. Maybe you get that to 400 milliseconds or something with a lot of optimization, but why would you, right? 503 milliseconds is really good. Instead, the focus here should be, well, how do you get it to load, maybe instead of the 46th element, how do you get it to load where it's the 21st element on the site, where it could show up here? Because if it started to load at the 1.8 second mark, it would be finished loading before the 2.5 second mark, where it would be able to hit that good speed, the 2.5 second mark that we're aiming for on LCP. So by using this report from WebPageTest, you can really start to understand how you need to improve LCP, not just what element to improve, but what specifically you need to do to make that LCP element load faster on your website. And the same is true with some of these other metrics here as well. So hopping over to the desktop version of this website, I want to show you this for the cumulative layout shift version because it's a little bit easier to see on their desktop website than on their mobile website what's going on here. So in this case, with cumulative layout shift, they give you a visual of what's happening with these different shifts. And we can see when we hover over this where that shift is occurring. So in the case of this website, it's this header banner. Scrolling back up here, you can see at the top of this screen, they've got this ad or header banner up here at the top of the screen. Well, when that loads, that's causing everything to shift down the page. And by looking at this report, we can see what that element is and what kind of shifting that's causing. So in this case, by that loading in, it's causing the entire website to shift down the page. And that's going to cause some pretty bad instability on the website's visual display. And that's going to create probably a frustrating experience for visitors. So you'd want to, in the case of this website, try to maybe add a width or height, or have a placeholder element or something that can kind of fill that space before the banner comes in. That way you can prevent some of that shifting occurring. And you can look at some of these other shifts that are happening as well. This one isn't as significant, but you can see a little bit of shifting with this notification bar. In this case, there's a little bit of shifting that happens when the skeleton frame shows up for these thumbnails down here. There's a little bit of shifting that happens here with this red bar down here, though that's not nearly as significant. So you can get an idea of not only what shifting is happening, but what shifting is probably going to impact visitors the most. And it's this one in the case of this website. You might look at this and realize, you know what, my shifting is pretty minor, and it's not really something I need to focus on or worry about because it's not really going to affect visitors that much. And then the last thing we have on here is total blocking time. And like I said, total blocking time is our proxy metric for interaction to next paint, since we aren't able to actually measure interaction to next paint in a simulated environment. So at total blocking time on here, what they show you is how busy the website's main thread is, or the way in which the browser is processing everything. So all the code that the browser has to run for the website happens on the main thread in the browser. And we can see how busy that is. And the busier the main thread is, that means the more code is running for this particular website. And the harder it's going to be for the browser to be able to respond to that visitor's interaction. So we can start to understand, well, why is it? What file is actually causing that? Down here in the table, it will tell you how much time all these different scripts from these different domains end up blocking the visitor's ability to interact with the page. In this case, it's predominantly this website itself, which tends to be the case. It's usually a lot of your own JavaScript code that's running to build interactive features on the website. It's going to contribute to a lot of blocking time. You'll end up seeing some third-party scripts in here as well. So you want to go through and look at these third-party scripts and see if they're truly needed on the page, if you have opportunities to do something different with those third-party scripts to reduce blocking. In this case, the blocking time from the third-party scripts isn't significant compared to what's happening here. In other cases, a third-party script might actually be more than what's happening on the website itself, in which case there's some opportunities there. But you can do better than that with this report to understand what's going on. You can also use this version of the waterfall chart to understand which specific file is contributing to that blocking. So we'll show you the different files that had to run that were contributing to that blocking time. And then you can see in the waterfall view how long it took for those particular files to load. And again, you can click in and view details of timing and all of that to see how those might be affecting things. But even more helpful here is this bar, the JS execution time. And we can see in like this example here on line 76, all these different areas where the JavaScript file was being executed. And so this is causing a lot of JavaScript to be executed. And every time that JavaScript is being executed, there's a potential that it's blocking a visitor's ability to interact with the page. So if somebody was on the page and they tried to click at the 7-second mark here, well, there's a lot of things happening at that point with this file. So the browser's busy trying to execute that file and not really able to respond to a visitor's interaction. That's going to create a pretty frustrating experience for people. So if you're trying to improve that and improve that experience for your visitors, not only do you know you want to focus on JavaScript files on this server, but you know specifically you want to focus on this particular JavaScript file, which did not mean to click on that. So you can really drill in here and understand what specifically you need to address. So it makes it a pretty helpful tool and report to use. So there's obviously a lot more that you can do in WebPageTest, a lot of other reports to dig into that I didn't even have a chance to get into today. So if you do want more about WebPageTest or you'd be curious to learn more about those, we'd be happy to do another webinar digging into more of those. Just let us know if that would be something of interest. If you do want to dig into more of WebPageTest, another way that you can learn more about WebPageTest is in my book that came out earlier this year, in Speed Metrics Guide We walk through all the different metrics that you can use to improve your website speed and performance and how you go about measuring those things. And a lot of the things that I talk about in the book is how you can use WebPageTest to measure those specific metrics, the different reports that are available in WebPageTest. I talk about some other speed tools as well that you can use to dig in and understand some of the different metrics. And then in the book, I also talk about what you can use from those reports to understand how you actually need to fix your website speed. So if you want to check it out, it's available on Amazon, or you can go to speedmetricsguide.com to learn more about that. So please check that out if you haven't already. So with that, we have a bit of time left here this morning to go through any questions that you have. So Andrea, I'll kick it back to you. Do we have any questions that have come in on chat?
Yeah, we do. So let's go through those. Ryan, thank you for posting lots of good questions today. If anyone else has other questions, also please feel free to drop those into chat. I'm going to start from the bottom and work our way backwards a little bit. So the first one, I like how GT Metrics waterfall chart is searchable and filterable to quickly isolate resources from specific domains. Does WebPageTest have any similar function, or can you export the HAR file to filter with another tool?
Yeah, they do have it on here. So let me go back to details. I think there is a way to export this as well. So down here, we've got the request details table. And so you can just use Control F in your browser, search through that for a specific file if you want. This is also something that you can usually be able to copy and paste pretty easily into a spreadsheet. I'm not sure if they give you a way to export this or not. I think they used to, but I'm not sure if they still do. But you can get that. What I'm scrolling through here is another way that they give you this, where it's a breakdown of each individual request. And they give you all of that information here. So along with that visual of the waterfall view, they give you that table and this text as well. So that way you can have some different ways to go through things.
Another one that's coming, can we use experiments to see what to improve and then tell devs what to work on or to work on it?
Yes. So experiments are a paid-only feature in WebPageTest, but they're really helpful. So you can go through. They give you some predefined experiments in here, so you can say, okay, well, if I want to defer my render blocking scripts, you can run this experiment, and then you can see how that improved all the different metrics, and it's really helpful. You can run several experiments at once. You can run these each individually. The other thing you can do in here is you can create your own experiments. So you can add elements. That's helpful if you're wanting to test like the impact of a new third-party script that you want to add to this page. You can also find and replace things. So you can swap things out. So you can get really creative with experimenting with things. Again, though, this is a pro-only thing that you can use in WebPageTest. So you do have to pay for WebPageTest in order to use the experiments. But it is, definitely a very helpful thing and one we use all the time to be able to just understand, is this even worth it? Is this going to work or not? I would say on here, make sure that when you run the experiments, you run it from a few different configuration types. So Ray, if you are running an experiment for render blocking, run that experiment with the same page on 4G as well as on cable, on mobile, as well as desktop, right? So that way you get an idea of how it impacts everything, because sometimes you get a really big win on a certain device with a fix and you get a pretty big loss on another device with a fix, and you need to balance those two out.
We have quite a few. So next up, besides the extra detail, how does WebPageTest compare with PageSpeed Insights as far as general scoring of core web vital metrics and reliability of how Google will inevitably view a website?
So there's a few ways. I mean, you're right that one of the biggest things is just the level of detail is different in WebPageTest. The other thing WebPageTest gives you compared to PageSpeed Insights is the ability to configure things more clearly. So you can look at different speeds. You can look at different browsers. You can look at, things a little bit more detailed, where PageSpeed Insights just gives you it's mobile or desktop. This gives you a lot more granularity, so you can get a sense for how your actual visitors are experiencing the website load. And that gets to how Google is, measuring the website. They're measuring across lots of different visitors with their core vitals. So they want to be able to, take a wide sample of people who are hitting the website. And that's what you want to be able to do as well. And you can experiment with some of those different things here in WebPageTest and look at those so you can understand that better, where PageSpeed Insights only gives you kind of that overview of what all visitors were experiencing and the percentile breakdowns. You can really step through and see, oh, okay, it's people on a 4G connection that are really having a poor experience with my website, not somebody else. So those are some of probably the biggest differences, I would say, between the two. As for what it means about how, Google is evaluating things and looking at things, all the real user metrics, the stuff from the Chrome user experience report, that's going to be brought in here as well. So this information, sorry, wrong report. Let me go back to performance summary. All this information here under real world usage metrics, that's all going to be stuff that you would get in PageSpeed Insights as well. So you would get the same information there as well. This is also what you get like in the Crux report as well, if you were to download that.
Perfect. Going back to the Waterfall report real quick, if you want to bring that up, then I'll ask the question. Are the pink lines to the right of the initial resource loading bars additional times that the JS files executed more functions during the page load?
Yes, those are the JS execution times. And you can get a sense of how much it executed based on the size of those bars. So this one's executing more. These little pink lines here, which you can barely see, mean that this one was executing just a little bit of stuff and probably wasn't blocking as much.
Perfect. Do you know if WebPageTest has any integrations with Screaming Frog or other tools to make it easy to scan an entire site?
That I'm not sure if they integrate with Screaming Frog. They do have an API that you can use. So I would imagine that somebody at some point has probably built some kind of connection between Screaming Frog and WebPageTest API. But they do have an API that you can use.
Perfect. One last one, and then we'll wrap up. Well, earlier in the webinar, we covered it. This is one we hear a lot. So I think it's always good to be reminded of why what the benefits are of running repeat tests. And then will the repeat test show fast speeds if server level caching is in place?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways that things are repeated in WebPageTest. So there's what I mentioned earlier of there's the first view where they start from what's called a cold state. There's nothing in cache and they're just starting fresh. And then there's the repeat view where they have things in cache. So that's one level in which things are repeated. And you can get a sense of how that changes. The other thing that you can do to get the repeat view is look at the different runs. So I didn't mention this, but by default, WebPageTest will run the same test 3 different times. And you can see what each of those runs are. So you can click this compare first views on here, and you can see what each of these runs looked like. So it shows you 1, 2, and 3. And you can get the waterfall for all those different runs. You can get the metrics for the different runs and so on. And on here, we can see how that might have changed between those loads. And you can see if there's any outliers. In this case, there's really not much of a difference between the two. Maybe this one loaded a little bit faster. These two maybe loaded a little bit slower. But really, we're not talking about too much of a difference between those two. If you compare the results, and you find that, oh, wait, my third test, everything loaded, way over here. And then these first 2 up here, things loaded a lot slower. Maybe there was something that went wrong with the test. So by comparing those different runs, you can get a sense of, is this really true? Or is this more of an outlier, that I'm seeing on here? The other way that you can then repeat things is you can just run the test from different configurations, run it across different pages. And by doing that, you can kind of start to say, okay, what looks like an outlier? What kind of seems like the normal thing for my website on here or not. So there's a few different ways you can repeat things to make sure that you're not running up against a lot of outliers or a lot of things that would kind of put your test in an unhelpful state where it's coming back with an untrue information.
Perfect. Well, with that, we're gonna wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any other questions as you process and start to use WebPageTest to measure website speed, please feel free to reach out to us. We're available to answer those questions. And again, we really appreciate your time today and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you, everyone. We'll be in touch soon.